In this section, we're going to cover 10 deadly church planting mistakes. And this is covered by the Bill Eastman, Jim Griffith text, but just want to give a highlight to each of these 10 different mistakes that I've seen made. And you may be able to name some other ones as well in discussions and in other forums and papers. The first one is not going through an assessment process. You know, church planting is hard, and just as there's an ideal profile for a church revitalization pastor, there's an ideal profile for a church planter. We've talked about Ridley's different characteristics. Some of these qualities are hardwired, as would be evidenced in the DISC or the Myers-Briggs assessment. Now there's the Enneagram. I haven't seen much on the Enneagram in church planters, but I'm sure there's some data out there as well. And some of these qualities are skills which can be learned. The most important qualities, however, are character related. You know, these come through sanctification, of course. We learn about this in theology, that we grow in God's love and in God's grace. And if you go through the UMC ordination, you know all about that word, sanctification. See, church planting is hard, and it will destroy those who aren't properly equipped and prepared and even called. This is the first of the 10 deadly planting mistakes. Go to an assessment center and receive godly counsel to determine if you are ready. Talk to mentors and those without you. The second is planting without a coach. The process of planting a church is complicated. There are literally hundreds of tasks, some big and some small, that must be accomplished prior to launching a church. Not only is it possible for you to forget some, it's likely that you might not even be aware of them all. So working alongside a church planting coach who has walked in your shoes, who will hold you accountable and who will encourage you in the process is vital. Be certain that your coach isn't just a nominal guide, but someone who is actively participating in your planting of the church from the outside, even if that means investing in a coach outside of your denomination or network. This is one of the church planting mistakes that's easy to ignore, but would be to your detriment. I myself have a church coaching business where I've walked alongside church planters from all across the country, and I, even as a planter, try to get coaching as well. The third one is launching too quickly. One of the missiologists, Peter C. Wagner, has famously said this phrase: planting new churches is the most effective evangelistic methodology known under heaven. Because of this, church planters are often excited and feel as though they're ready to launch after only a few weeks or a few months of planting. This is among the most massive church planting mistakes. Think about it. Babies take 9 months to grow in the womb before being born. And church plants should take at least 6 months, preferably 9 to 12 months, to gestate. Launching too quickly means that many of the hundreds of pre-launch tasks were either hurried or skipped. You may not see the impact of rushing the process on day one, but you will feel it eventually. So you got to be patient and submit to the process. It will be worth it. The fourth deadly mistake is leading without a team. There's a popular book on church planting which features an image of a man on the cover holding a sickle in one hand, a Bible in the other, and a cross around his neck. It's a masculine and powerful image. It's also massively dangerous. The concept of a Lone Ranger church planter going to conquer the gates of hell and reaping a harvest of souls for Jesus is one of the most devastating church planting mistakes. The most successful church plants are the ones that are led by a team and not by a single planter. While not every church plant can afford multiple paid staff from the beginning, there should be a multiple staff pre-launch, even if they are held by volunteers or part-time. Also, these should be leaders empowered with real responsibility, not just task accomplishers. Churches that rely too heavily on one personality will rise and fall with that leader. It's a dangerous and deadly path. The fifth is launching too small. You can launch too quickly and you can launch too small. Often these are interconnected and related. Ideally, your launch team should be about 60 to 75 people. Less than 50 and your church will struggle long-term to grow. The reason for this is threefold. First, launch team members fund ministry. At 75 people, much of the ministry is being funded just by your team. Secondly, you need those 75 people to be advocates for your church. Less than 50 in your church will struggle to get the word out that it even exists. And finally, with less than 50 launch team members, you'll likely struggle to sustain the necessary ministries. Launch team members are volunteers. They're unpaid, and without enough volunteers, your ministries suffer. If the ministries suffer, people won't come back. And if people don't come back, the church doesn't grow, and it's a death spiral. So don't launch too small. Take the time to build your launch team the right way. Number 6 is relying too heavily on outside funding. The church that I helped plant in 2017 was self-supporting probably within 2 years of its inception. I don't recommend that because it was out of necessity for us, but hardly ideal. Alternatively, some church plants get used to the outside funding and don't plan ahead enough for those times when the funds dry up. So be proactive. If the funding supports your church at 75% level at launch, budget for it to cover 60% and stretch it yourself to gain that 15% gap in offerings. Always budget in forward thinking way ahead of your projections so that you're not caught flat-footed when the outside funding goes away. I've seen that so many times, especially with denominational funding, that they fund you for 3 years, and then at the end of 3 years, if you're not self-sustaining, the money is gone, and sometimes the churches as well. Number 7 is neglecting solid assimilation plans. Church plants are exciting. People come because they want to check out something new and different. They may even stick around long term because of the newness. But at some point, your church will cross that mysterious threshold where people stop coming just because it's new. At this point, you suffer consequence number 7 of the deadly church planting mistakes: not having a solid assimilation plan. When excitement wears off, strategies begin to matter. Be intentional about this on the front end by clarifying your guest follow-up process and your discipleship process as well. Number 8 is installing local governance too quickly. Church plants are a magnet for toxic people or leaders from toxic situations. In any case, church planters and church plants must be cautious about installing local leaders too quickly. The governance of your church should be outside of the local congregation, probably for 3 to 5 years. This gives ample time to identify and grow leaders organically who believe in the mission, vision, and values of your church, rather than people who are looking to import their own. This is one of the church planting mistakes that people often resist and think it's being unbiblical to have non-local governance. Church planters want to trust their local leaders, but many church plants have suffered the consequences of relinquishing too much control to local leaders before the church was ready. This is not an excuse to have no accountability. Instead, this is an exhortation to fully empower experienced, trusted leaders that govern from without until those within are ready to lead in a healthy and godly way. Number 9, waiting too long to implement a leadership pipeline. On the flip side of the previous mistake is completely disregarding the leadership development process for months or years. From the very beginning, church plants should have a leadership development process in place. Identify the leadership levels, the corresponding competencies, of process for taking leaders from one level to the next, and a system for identifying, assessing, and launching leaders. This is a difficult process to develop mid-stroke, so do the planning of your leadership pipeline in the pre-launch phase. And finally, number 10, neglecting the process of strategic planning. Church plants often fall victim to this final mistake of the 10 deadly church planting mistakes. Church plants assume that because they had to strategically plan their launch, that they don't need to do strategic planning post-launch. This couldn't be further from the truth. If it was done well, your mission and values shouldn't need to shift after a few years. However, there's a massive difference between a 3-year-old church and a 3-month-old church. It's the process of shifting from church plant to church planted. Strategic planning is critical to long-term success in making this transition well. Too many church plants assume that they can continue to use the "we're new" excuse for things that are dysfunctional. That excuse is valid but has an expiration date. Don't wait for a church plateau or decline before you engage in strategic planning. It comes more quickly than you would think. And I recommend a thorough strategic planning process 18 months after launch. These are the 10 deadly church planting mistakes. Perhaps you have others that you want to include that you can share in the forum as well, or you would like to email or even write about in a paper.